Hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this short interview together with Jason Bayton. My name is Alessandro DeCarli, CEO of Hypergate, a solution around single sign-on for the mobility space. And what brings us together here in this interview is actually Android Enterprise, but I'll let you introduce you first, Jason.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm Jason Bayton. I've been in the Android space for a good many years, starting out back when device admin was the way to manage devices, and everything sort of from that point to where we stand now. So obviously it's been a considerable amount of change, and I've had a good bird's eye view over it. So I've done a lot of things in that space. Started out sort of IT admin side of things, worked into consultancy, and today I'm the Chief Product Officer for a company called Social Mobile out in the States, where I get to now define the devices and services that I consider important, to the degree I've been telling other people and other organizations that they should be adopting over the years, as many who might watch this can relate to if they know me or if they've dealt with me before. So it's interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned device admin. Now we're on Android Enterprise. It's been a hell of a journey, I would say, right? I think now we really reached a stage where you do have a lot of very interesting features that allow you to really bring these devices into an enterprise context. What do you think is your company doing especially well with Android Enterprise?
So I'd say primarily it's sticking to the roots, the core, and the basics of Android Enterprise, right? So it's easy enough to take AOSP and do all of these crazy modifications and go a particular route with it, but on all the stuff I'm building, designing, everything else, the main goal is to align as closely with Google, with Android Enterprise capabilities and everything else as I can. There's obviously scope for not necessarily improving, but growing that to a degree with initiatives like OEM config, and that's something I'm deeply integrating and reviewing at the moment with the team as to what we can do that is a value add above the core Android Enterprise offering. But yeah, other than that, it's ensuring that what is shipped ultimately is the best at what it can be for admins around the globe trying to manage these devices, and expecting that consistent experience that we get with Android Enterprise generally.
Perfect. So let me just summarize there. You're saying that by staying on the most standard way on how to implement the Android Enterprise APIs, you're able to achieve a very, very thought through user and also admin experience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Now, we met each other actually for the first time at MWC back in 2019. This year's MWC, sadly, we couldn't meet there. What do you think, what did you miss the most of that event?
So I think the event this year would probably be a lot about 5G, which is certainly interesting to me, as obviously it's one of the things that I'm going to need to support at some point on the products and services of it. But where we're going and how that's being implemented, and even some of the the conversations around 5G are also that they're interesting. They provoke a lot of thought. There's obviously a lot of anti-5G stuff out there that again is spread through fear and uncertainty and everything else. But I think that would have been the main thing, to see what other companies and attendees are doing with 5G today and what they plan to. just so I can gauge the market on where we're going. I mean, it's inevitable as it stands anyway, because that is the next best thing, and that's what everybody's going to do. But we were seeing what I'd consider be more than a preview last year. We were getting a first taste of it, and I imagine at this point this year, it would have been everywhere and a big talking point and everything else. It goes without saying that I was also looking forward to catching up with other vendors, the EMMs, the OEMs, and a bunch of people I always bump into when I go to MWC. And I haven't gone there many times, of course, but when I have, it's been a great opportunity to meet people from all parts of the globe and do that bit of networking that you don't necessarily get to do when you're just chatting through a forum or catching up over a call or email stuff. So I think that's the primary reason. Other technologies and stuff, I'm sure there would have been a lot more. The new devices that Sony's and the HMDs and everybody else launch, also interesting to go to. I had planned on attending a few launch events as well, but again, given the circumstances, that was not necessarily viable.
And is there any special devices you're looking forward to at the moment?
I mean, not necessarily. So it's nice just to see what the market is doing in general, right? So the folding phones, folding devices, I think are fascinating. They're not necessarily something I would use personally at the moment, just because I think the first iteration of this sort of thing is better left to somebody who can spare the cash to go out and tinker, and if it breaks, it breaks, sort of thing. But that is going to be an interesting, more than interesting. It's going to be revolutionary, I suppose, in the way that we handle these devices that we're looking at so many hours a day, and adopting the form factors and the way Google are working on supporting the different foldable devices and how the experience can be unified across all of those different form factors when you've got folding inwards, folding outwards, upside down, and inside out, and everything else. So that's certainly one of the interesting things I've been looking at. Other than that, I think it's more run-of-the-mill, samey, right? So new candy bars with uprated cameras, seeing how many more cameras we can fit on a device, and everything else. It's all very interesting nonetheless, and it's a good opportunity to get up and close with these things, which again, you can't necessarily do unless you're invited by every vendor to their own individual launch events, which doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah. I also wonder how many more cameras they will fit on the back of that phone.
There's a lot of real estate.
Yeah. Right. Empty space still. All right. So what do you think where we are with Android Enterprise adoption in general, right? Because if we take a look at device admin, it's really been a long journey now, and it's not comparable at all to the Android Enterprise, which brings so many advantages. But are those advantages actually being adopted? What do you think about it?
So I mean, if you look at the stats that Google now and again provide, mostly under NDA, the upward trend is that more and more organizations are adopting Android Enterprise. There aren't any hard figures, and it's something that's perplexed me for a long time. Is if there's growth, why would you not advertise it? But nevertheless, there is an upward trend. Certainly, the organizations and the bubble, I should say, that I'm in, I'm seeing it left, right, and center. People are coming on board. People are reaching out to me in work, out of work, all the time with, we're just getting started. How can we do this? How can we do that? The stats on my own site are progressively increasing. Things like the what is Android Enterprise documentation and all of the associated docs, they are consistently increasing in traffic over time, which is not necessarily an indicator, because the site is quite small, but in any case, the fact that there is that upward trend is good.
You're just being humble, come on.
Yeah,
but that's a good property.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to quickly say how to reach that website so that we can sneak in a small ad.
Yeah, sure. So it's Bayton, bayton.org. And if you want to go straight to it, then stick /Android on the end there. And you can stick up some little description or whatever link to it if you want underneath. But yeah, that's how you get to it. And I've taken a little break over the last few months because things have been pretty hectic. But all the documentation there is as up to date as I can get it currently, and I think it's a good resource, particularly for people who are just starting out, really wanting to learn the basics. Wherever I can, I'll document it as best as possible.
Absolutely, and I can just second that, and not because you're now on this interview, but it really is one of the best, if not the best, source of documentation that is really also accessible and understandable for admins that want to tinker around in the Android enterprise space. Perfect. Now, what kind of do you have now, since the Android enterprise adoption in various companies, are there any specific new use cases that you find very exciting, like people using it for specific things that you were thinking before, okay, this is something that I haven't seen yet, and it's getting more and more useful for companies?
I think one of the most interesting use cases I've seen, and it's one that's not necessarily going to be supported long term, unfortunately, particularly with the introduction of Android 11, is the way organizations will use the work profiles on fully managed devices. Now, as I say, Google have deprecated that for Android 11. So in Android 11, there's a new way of deploying the COPE deployment scenario. But I've seen a few organizations who take both profiles and treat them as corporate profiles. And you say you have one, or the parent profile being a traditional work profile. So you have your corporate apps and everything there. And then in the work profile itself, they would push in some additional security, additional restrictions on apps that they consider to be that much more important. So it's very common, obviously, to use the COPE deployment scenario as personal and work. It's not so common to see it work and additional security on work apps that need that separate encryption and isolation from the rest of everything else. I think that's probably one of the most interesting use cases I've seen recently, because it bucks the trend in that respect. Of what is expecting of it, and the fact that it's going away is a little bit disappointing, because it prevents that sort of creativity in the way that you deploy that a little bit. But that said, I know Samsung, I think, are working on something, though there's nothing to announce just yet on that. So for those customers who are using Samsung devices and want to continue that, then maybe there will be a way of going on with that in future. For everybody else, the introduction of work profiles on company-owned devices in Android 11, it's going to be far more privacy-focused, privacy, however you want to say it, focused, to then make sure that if you are a user who's been granted this personal use, then the organization can't see what you're doing, they can't see the apps you've got installed. You can enforce some restrictions as an admin, but all of that privacy is there. So the way it's migrating, it makes sense, but losing that sort of flexibility is something I'm probably not going to forget for a little while. And I think that's probably one of the most creative ways. There are other ways I could think that would be of interest as well, if Google ever were to support multiple work profiles on a device, then that would be fascinating. And I can understand that the implementation of that would be an absolute nightmare, no doubt, with the way work profile is already implemented today. How would you handle the badges? How would you maintain device performance? Because obviously you're inflating multiple users within one user's space and everything else. But the impact of that would be, you could be one person, one consultant, one doctor, whatever you want, and working in different companies as this consultant. You can have a work profile for company A, work profile for company B, or in the case of the doctor, the practice A, practice B, hospital C, whatever. And that really would then, I think, boost the flexibility of that platform considerably. So although Google are likely probably never to be able to support it, or if they ever did, it would be hampered by the amount of work profiles you could inflate. That is something that's always been on my mind and would always be fascinating to explore.
Absolutely. I also think that the multiple work profiles are something that is very useful, at least for our, let's say, role where we are working with multiple companies. That, of course, everybody has their own EMM and management of that work profile. So I know what you're talking about. I feel your pain as well. I need to re-enroll my devices like 2 or 3 times a week.
Lots of people want it. So it's certainly something that's in demand. And again, you know, it's within the bubble that we're in, I suppose. I don't know what end users out in XYZ companies in different parts of the world want, but whenever I'm talking to people in this sphere that we're in, it's like it's something that everybody wants. So yeah, but you know, Google have got their finger on the pulse, so I'm sure if it was that in demand, then they'd maybe try to do something about it.
Now, if we compare the iOS platform as well as Android Enterprise, where do you think or see that Android Enterprise is clearly ahead of the game and bringing like additional tools to the table that you can fulfill more use cases? What do you think, if you could just name 3, the main things?
So I can't necessarily speak for iOS 14, which has just been announced because I haven't really looked at it. I know in iOS 13 they were bringing the Apple's managed iTunes accounts and the ability to have a little bit of separation on device there, which emulates, I think, to a degree what we were doing on Android with the work profile, where you can push any application into the work profile for it to be separately encrypted, isolated from the main parent profile on the device. That's slightly more limited on iOS as I saw it, so it's limited to the apps and services you can deploy. But all the same, the features, there's a little bit of parity in that. Android takes it, as far as I'm concerned, obviously, because you can push anything. You can do a lot more with it. And the way the accounts are managed, I think is maybe a little bit more streamlined. I mean, don't hold me to it. I don't want to get attacked in comments or get hate mail or anything, but I'm naturally biased.
Of course, and the topic can get also very religious, I believe. But
no doubt. I think wider on the platforms themselves, Android versus iOS, rather than Android Enterprise necessarily, is, Gartner have done the same analysis for the last few years. It shows Android for things like kernel encryption, security controls, and other bits and pieces. They're a bit ahead of iOS, and I think that's probably going to be something that will continue for the foreseeable future, just because things like SE Linux and the way everything is sort of implemented in a slightly different way, I think gives Android a bit of a leg up there. Never say never, because it could change with iOS 14. Again, haven't looked at it, or 15 or 16 or whatever. Things change all the time. There's a lot of parity coming into play. iOS supports widgets now, so that's cool. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, they are catching up, especially on things that they said wouldn't never be implemented on iOS devices. Now they're starting to add those as well. So obviously there are differences that where they also feel that something was missing there.
Yeah,
cool.
There's the security aspect as well, and people will say it, the whole security by obscurity thing. I love that Android is open source. I love that I can go in and pick and poke at things. I don't understand everything in that code base, and nor would I assume I'd be expected to at any point in my career. But it's nice that anybody at any time, no matter what you do for work, can just poke in there and sort of figure out if there's anything that needs to be resolved, right? Bundling the fact that we have those monthly security updates and everything else very consistently like clockwork, I think it does a lot for the general security of the Android platform, although the perception still probably needs a little bit of work. Everything is there to make it so that people can see, Android is a secure platform, and it can be even more secure at any point if anybody decides to look at that source, which is very powerful.
Absolutely. I think at this point it's really just a perception, and not anymore anything that is objectively better with iOS, because there are a lot of reports, as you were mentioning, also this Gartner security report that objectively shows how Android is better in the security space. Up to this point, right? Because
up to this
again,
point, yeah. Because things do change all the time. I've got a link off to one of those recent Gartner reports on my site as well, which Gartner don't publish it publicly, so it's one of the things that you can grab a screenshot of it from various sources. But I've just taken that screenshot and rebuilt it entirely into a PDF. So if anybody wants to take a look, it's there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and by the way, I'm also using your material there in my presentations, so I'm always very, very happy that you're doing that work. So, as most can see, we're now in a let's say work at home scenario because of this whole pandemic situation. What do you think do you see any changes in the adoption of certain mobile related technologies? And the second follow-up question would be, if so, do you think that they will last even after the pandemic?
So on the second one, I think yes, changes that we're seeing with the pandemic today are almost certainly going to be carried across into day-to-day lives when everything does settle back down and go to a routine. There are organizations across the world who have been vehemently opposed to any sort of remote work or anything where if your body is not in a seat where somebody can see you, then you can't be working sort of attitude. And obviously now that we've been forced to work from home, attitudes are shifting, which is fantastic. I've been working from home for 5+ years out of this little room here, and I can do my work perfectly fine. I can lead a team, no issue at all. And that's not necessarily related to Android itself, but it shows that it can be done, and there are certainly a type of workforce that needs to be in a fixed location, depending on what they do and what's expected of them. But a lot of the organizational structure, I think, of many companies, it doesn't matter where you are as long as you're doing the work. And now we've seen organizations sort of come to that realization, then I think indeed there are companies already who have declared that people can work from home, going forward, full stop, whatever happens. And that is that's very good news for me, and I guess for many others. So yeah, from that perspective, there's definitely going to be changes as we go on. From a technology point of view, it's certainly interesting. So I've seen that there has been an enormous demand for devices around the globe, and that's because people who are in fixed locations with an office phone and everything else, they don't necessarily need a corporate device, because they come into work, they sit down, they've got everything they need, they leave at the end of the day. You can't necessarily take all of that home with you. I mean, in some cases you can, of course, but not always. So there's definitely been a strong demand for hardware, and I've seen different projects, in different locations talking about we need to outfit all of our employees with mobile devices. It doesn't necessarily matter what type of mobile device, but the fact that they can be reachable, the devices can be managed, it's all crucial to ensuring that this sort of work from home thing works. How organizations choose to deploy that, I mean, I don't really have any information on that necessarily. Obviously, there will be a lot of BYOD sort of deployments, but there will also be fully managed. I mean, it depends on what the company wants and how they do it. All that matters is, I guess, they can get those devices managed. And for those who deploy the Android devices, because typically Android is far more budget friendly, far more flexible to the use cases they need, it means that things like Android Enterprise make all of that setup, provisioning, and enrollment as smooth and as trouble-free as possible.
Perfect. Yes. So I think I have one last question because I'm very conscious of time now. The question that I would like to ask you is, what do you think about these trends to the cloud? Is this something that also you can see? And the follow-up question would be, do you think that every organization is then going to adopt a cloud architecture?
So yes, there's an upward trend on cloud, and I can say it from experience as well. You know, I've had on-prem servers. I've made it a mandate to get them up to the cloud, so I don't have to sit there and manage physical hardware necessarily within my business. And that same sort of viewpoint, I think, is adopted by many. There are obviously industries where that either isn't feasible financially, because there's enough hardware on premise that putting it into a cloud will be that much more expensive to handle. And there's industries that are sort of regulated or extra security required and everything else that they just cannot trust a cloud partner to look after the hardware. But in general, things like Office 365, G Suite, whatever other alternatives exist, they are doing very well, and they're doing very well for a reason. Is they take all of the effort of management and demand and supply and scaling, and simplify it into one console that an IT admin can just click and go. And so, yeah, I think as things move and progress, and the more organizations jump on board and everything else, cloud adoption is only going to increase, and I think it's an indicator of what's to come as well. That said, I'll still run a few servers on premise down again for particular reasons, and I guess that would be the same for many organizations as well. So, and I guess that ties at least to some degree into things like Kerberos and the other things that you guys are very well known for as well, and what impact that could potentially have on you.
Yeah, well, for us, this thing that we see is that, yes, services are being adopted where it makes sense for large organizations. We've even seen very large companies moving towards the cloud, but it's always been a very hybrid approach. And things like now the Active Directory is usually the last thing that you want to move to the cloud, because it's also something that if it's not reachable, nobody can log into their phone or log into their laptop anymore. So you always think twice before you start moving that Active Directory to the cloud. And but that's also where we see the biggest potential for our solution is in this hybrid cloud space. I don't know if you have seen it, but last couple of weeks, we published the series where we integrated with various SaaS and cloud services, just to show these how seamless actually single sign-on can be, and how you can really provide that specific user experience that also protects you from any phishing attacks. Cool. That was a little side advertisement also for Hypergate there. Anyways, thank you very much for your time, Jason. Thank you for being here with us. I think we covered a lot of interesting topics. And maybe is there something that you would like to add, to say, to ask additionally before we close?
No. I think that's all good. Thank you very much for hosting me. It's been fascinating as always whenever I speak to you, and I look forward to at some point when everything gets back to normal, catching up in person again.
Absolutely, we'll do that.
Nice.
Perfect. Take care. Bye, Jason.
Bye bye.